that anyone would want to put a mic in front of me is evidence of the apocalypse, as far as I'm concerned.
Welcome to the Hardly Heroes Podcast.
High above the city, they shine in my spotlight. Commissioner on the rooftop, double H in the night sky. For the sidekicks we fight, for the right crosses we go. For the ninjas we injure, revenge on our foes. From crime alleys to radioactive insects, genetic mutations. Weapon X rejects are infinite, Ursa in crisis. Our wars are civil but secret. Here come Buddy, Manny, and Aaron, blaring through your speakers. Yeah, Hardly Heroes. It's clobbering time.
Ready to begin? You guys are.
Here we go.
Yeah. We got Chris Marin here, John Hebink, and Ethan Beavers here. We are super excited. We're Hardly Heroes Podcast, and we do a podcast all about, TVs, movie, everything geek related. And I was really excited to talk to you guys with being artists, and everything you guys do I think is just so awesome because I cannot draw myself. So when I do get to see, how much effort goes into, all your guys' stuff, I think is just so awesome, and it's, really inspiring. And my stick figures haven't gotten better in time, so I'm working on it. But I wanted to know if you could tell the audience, a little bit about, the stuff you draw, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, well, I've drawn Wonder Woman and, like it says on my poster, Batman and Superman and Spider-Man and Nova and some of the other characters like Doctor Strange. So,
Is there anybody particularly that stands out?
that stands out for me. Well, Nova, actually, because I got to write that as well. So I had a really good experience doing that. They really gave me a lot of freedom on that book. Because it wasn't one of the biggest selling ones, probably, but they just figured, do what you want, just keep cranking them out. So I did that, and that was a while ago. And more recently, I've done stuff for Heroic Publications, which is a smaller publisher.
John?
You want current stuff or past stuff?
Oh, no, just any, kind of give out your
Whatever you wanna tell
portfolio
me.
for everybody, just so they know.
I first started working in comics in '91. I did a small press thing with Fantagraphics called Metacops that is sadly forgotten. In another year, I broke in at Marvel on the coattails of Mike Manley, who's a friend of mine, a terrific inker and penciler, and edits Draw magazine. And he was offered the job of drawing Nick Fury, and he was too busy to take it. So he said, "Well, I've got a friend who loves that character, and it was always sketching him, me." And so I tried after that and got it. And then I had a pretty short ride at Marvel. I also I also did one issue of Daredevil. I'm not really great at straight superhero, but it was nice to be able to say that to have Daredevil on my resume. Thank you. And I drew the Power Rangers back in '94, '95, and I drew Eek the Cat, a Saturday morning cartoon character that you guys remember? Eek the Cat?
Yeah.
No?
I'll be darned. No, I'm not surprised. And then I did a lot of years drawing Elvira, which was just a low-selling black and white comic, but I really enjoyed my editor, a fellow named Richard Howell, and my art improved a lot during that period. And then I think things started to. I can't remember right now. I did a thing called Space Chicks and Businessmen that was serialized in Hustler Comics. There was a Hustler Comics because Hustler saw Penthouse doing Penthouse Comics, and they thought, oh, we could do something like this, but much, much worse. It was sort of nice for me in that all the other art in that book was terrible, and I was drawing two features in two widely different styles, so that made me feel a little better about myself.
That's cool.
Those are the Those are the main highlights, or at least the ones I can remember right now.
Yeah, no. Ethan?
Oh, let's see. Well, thanks for coming out, by the way, everybody out
Oh, yeah.
there
Amen.
in podcast land as well.
Yeah.
And everybody who showed up to listen to us babble on about how great we are. Thanks for coming to the convention. I was about 31 or so when I decided to try to become a professional artist. I was watching Samurai Jack had just come out, and the Justice League cartoon had just come out on Cartoon Network, and Genndy Tartakovsky's work and Bruce Timm's work were basically spoke to me. And Darwin Cook had just come on the scene in comics, and he was another person that was like, I'm not terribly far away from the type of work that he was doing. I thought maybe I should pursue comics. So I did. I just took my portfolio to San Diego Comic-Con, and oddly enough, I got work right away. I started off in independent comics with a guy that had been published and had just actually won an Eisner, Mike Oming. He had just won an Eisner for Powers with Brian Bendis, and he was doing some independent stuff, and he had a really good working relationship with Image, and then I met another fellow there that I worked on a small book at Image called Noble Causes, and from there things just kind of slowly but surely eked their way around until I was doing some fill-ins on the Justice League Unlimited comic at DC. I met a fellow named Adam Beechin, who was a writer on that comic, and wound up writing for animation as well. He worked on Teen Titans and most recently Transformers.
Nice guy.
Great guy. Really helped me out. He took some of the samples that I showed him at a convention in WonderCon in San Francisco, showed him to the editor at DC, and got me my first job at DC. And I had no idea he was doing any of that, which is bizarre. Anyways, I did a couple of issues there, and then some guys from the show saw the work that I did on the comic. They hired me to be on the to work storyboard on the show, and then I kind of bounced around at DC doing short stories in the Cartoon Network Action Pack book, which was I did Ben 10 and I did Samurai Jack, and for a while there I was pretty much the regular artist for their Samurai Jack short stories, and soon thereafter I got contacted by a children's book publisher who was looking to publish a children's book with sort of a comic book style, and they asked me if I was available, and I was, and so I committed to work on this book called Nerds. That book turned out to be a New York Times bestseller. Wow. And so within a couple of years I had gone from not being a professional to working on a New York Times bestseller, and now since then I've worked on more Samurai Jack, Batman at DC. I've done lots of Batman little children's books, Wonder Woman, Flash. I've done several little golden books. I did some Star Wars comics, Indiana Jones, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Dexter's Lab. And I'm probably forgetting some stuff too, but I did a bunch of little golden books, which I really feel like was my best stuff, and really took me in another direction as an artist. And now I actually do like digital painting and stuff like that, and it's better than flipping burgers, man. So. And I flip burgers, by the way. I'm not like making that up.
How does technology play into all this now that
technology is awesome?
But I feel it dehumanizes me and makes me feel like a number.
I just don't. In terms of like having a monitor to draw on, like my eyes are failing me, and so now I can draw on this giant monitor and I can zoom in or zoom out in as much as I need to or don't need to, and now when I'm inking traditionally, I have to take my glasses off, and it makes it difficult for me to see how, let's say, a thick line on this object relates to a thin line on this other object, and I don't necessarily have that problem so much anymore if I can zoom in and zoom out. So particularly just from the drawing standpoint, you do save steps, you save time. You obviously don't have original to sell, but technology in terms of the actual drawing is helping me. In addition to that, having a presence on the internet, because I joined the internet like a couple years ago. And so I had a website, it's like a year old or so, and I think I joined Instagram a couple of years ago, but I only really started putting up there a year and a half ago, and then I joined Facebook too. And so having a website, actually people in publishing will find you if you have one. Which is, it's pretty much a no-brainer, but I've had the website up for about a year, and I've had a bunch of jobs come through that I've actually had to say no to because I've got so much stuff going. So it's I'm pro technology insofar as a person can be pro technology without becoming Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about John and Chris? Do you guys use a lot of technology?
Well, I do just kind of the basic, Photoshop to kind of dress up stuff I've already drawn and scanned in. I still have original art, but all my coloring and occasional lettering is all Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever. So yeah, I'd be completely lost without it,
Yeah.
for the most part. It's all so interconnected, and to a lesser degree I also use it to promote my work. I mean, I use Facebook daily to promote wherever I put it. Compared to what other people I see doing it, who are even independents, it's just amazing how well these guys, because they're not connected to Marvel or DC, they have to try that much harder and they have to work much harder at it. And,
Scott Weldon gets
yeah,
these
like him,
discussions
and
going.
how they just are constantly putting or Dan Cooney,
Mm-hmm.
constantly putting their stuff out there, on a daily basis, and finding little ways to do promotions and charitable things that gets their artwork involved.
I don't use Kickstarter, but
So-
even that,
Yeah.
I know a lot of people do, and that helps them get their stuff out there without going through Marvel or DC or some other large publisher.
Yeah, Dan Brereton was just saying that to me. He said, I could probably get work at DC or Marvel, but it's so hard. I mean, they have a much tighter scheduling thing going these days, where you have to be producing just nonstop and or 24/7, and it's probably a little less work to do something on Kickstarter. Setting it up, do your little promotions.
Yeah, keep all the money.
And,
Yeah.
and you own it all. Yeah, you can keep your own. Keep it. So it's a good model. I haven't tried it yet, but I have something in the works, definitely, that I would use.
Anybody in this room who's creative, you're living in a golden age, because
I
the
totally agree.
gatekeepers can be removed from the equation. The people that are going to retain the rights to what you work on, take most of the money, you don't need them as much anymore because of things like Patreon and Kickstarter. There's a chance to connect directly with the people who are interested in your work. And so that's one of the happiest aspects of technology. And then I like Clip Studio Paint a lot, the program, because it's geared toward making comics in a way that Photoshop is not and could never be. And if you like the look of Zipatone, the old-fashioned dot tone screens, it's so easy and fun to put that in Clip Studio. And the whole program, it's kind of horsey-looking interface, but it's set up to make a comics page work. And so it knows how to composite your final page and make the dot pattern not moiré. You guys know what a moiré is? It's when you have two patterns overlapping each other, and they create a third pattern that's bigger and looser and distracting, and it looks completely unprofessional. Not a problem with Clip Studio. I really like that. I really like that program.
I have a question that I've asked the other artists at panels that I've done, which is basically speaks to what you just said, which is, has there ever been a better time to be an artist? What do you think?
Well, maybe in the golden age of newspaper illustration or magazine illustration.
Yeah, they were considered the celebrities of their day, just like movie stars and stuff.
Yeah, like Charles Dana Gibson.
I think of it in terms of, like, I asked a question of another artist, and he said he didn't know in terms of history, and then he said, there's so much bad art that's out there, and that's what I mean by, let's say you're a bad artist, you can still make money. I mean, anyone who goes to Barnes and Noble and walks around can see what I would consider to be some trashy work. But that's not bad, necessarily, because that person is now a professional and that person got paid. And so you don't necessarily have to be the greatest artist in the world to make a few bucks on Instagram or Patreon or whatever it happens to be. And you don't have to be the world's greatest artist to travel around and do the comic book show circuit. And you don't have to have the most polished look. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be super artist. You don't have to be Norman Rockwell to make a buck. And even if you have a normal day job, you still can pursue your dream and you can get better. And in that way, I can't think of a better time there has ever been to be an artist. And that's one of the reasons why I hear a lot of artists complain, and I reject it. I'm just like, it was more difficult when I started. There was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, there was no Kickstarter, there was none of that. There was basically Marvel, DC, Image, and even Image had just come out. I mean, it wasn't like it had been, a cornerstone of the comic book industry for years. So I just think that now's the time. Make it happen if that's what you're into. Pursue it. It's not going to. I don't know how. It probably will get easier, but I don't know how. But it's certainly not going to get harder.
Well, with the easiness that technology brings, there's also a lot of saturation.
Sure,
of everything,
that's what the
right?
one guy was talking about.
Right. But as a podcast, we completely agree. It's like we don't have to have corporate sponsors. We don't have to have a broadcasting degree. We just want to do this, and we're doing what we love. And it's
Exactly.
fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's just, I did want to ask, as a young kid, was it pretty easy for you to like draw, or was this something that you were dedicated that you wanted to do and you were like, this is what I'm going to do, so I'm going to focus on making it better? I mean, I know as an artist you're probably always growing and always getting better, but at a young age did you just feel like it kind of came natural?
You recognize your talent.
In my case, I felt that way.
Yeah.
I was just drawing just for fun, and other people responded to it and said, would gather around my desk at school, and I thought, hey, this is cool, But I still never really took it seriously as a profession to pursue for many years until I was like a young adult, or until I was going to art school. And even then, not as a comic book artist, because I thought comics, that's for other people. I'm not going to be good enough or be accepted, even though I always copied comics. I would copy the pictures that I liked, certain panels, and that's really what taught me how to draw. And then, I just happened to kind of fall in with the right people who were kind of like-minded and who were already drawing comics, some of them, professionally, and shared a studio with them. And at this time, I was already doing illustration and commercial art for advertising agencies and stuff. And I thought, comics was just maybe someday or something I was dreaming about. But I started doing samples anyway.
I'm sorry.
Because I would have art directors saying, "Are you like into comics at all?" They'd just see my work, trying to look all professional, and they'd say, "You have a comic book influence here." So I started responding to that and sending in samples to Marvel and DC.
Oh, wow.
And but then and it's not really an early. At this point, I'm in my late 20s, and the wisdom that I had heard was, if you haven't gotten work by the time you're 30 and in the comics business, you're just forget it. It's not going to happen. You're too old.
Well, that means we all three started on the older side, because
somewhat.
I was 31 or 32 when I got my first comic published.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but anyway, I did just keep sending in stuff, and, because I did, enjoy it, definitely. And it was more fun than doing the advertising stuff, drawing a picture of a gas station or a bottle of detergent,
Mind numbing.
Yeah. It's like, this bottle of detergent, it looks good, but can you just bring it in a little bit on the right, and can you straighten out the label on this side? And it just kills you, it really does. And so, and even though the pay can be good, for me at the time, comics was more reliable. Once I started getting work, monthly books, I was like, well, this is pretty good. It's reliable. I can count on a regular paycheck. And I had a contract with DC, and that was that. So I pretty much never looked back to that.
That's awesome.
John, you get started early, or
Yeah, I remember my mom when I was 4 teaching me. Well, here you draw. If you want to draw a cat, you do an oval and oval for the head and points for, and so I always felt encouraged and tended to stand out in elementary school classes, at least up until about 6th grade. And then, so I felt my art was pretty good, and I just day before yesterday rediscovered some old high school art, and it's absolutely terrible. I mean, the faces would be like semi-okay. I wish I could show it because it's so silly and embarrassing. It looks like a couple has maybe just gone at it because the guy's kind of cool. He buttoned his shirt, and I wasn't trying to be ironic, and it's just like I would just kind of draw his legs, some marks down each side, and then not be entirely sure about when to stop with feet, and just so the legs are really really super long. Oh man. And still, I was able to ultimately make a living in comics. I think the point I would pull from this is that talent is just a small running start. That it's so much more about the work. I mean, you hear about all these guys have done, all the work they've done, and it's a huge amount, and they became valuable artists because they were so productive. I mean, and not to take anything away from the quality of the images they made, but they wouldn't have been the same guys if they didn't get the pencil on the paper so much.
Yeah, it's a lot of it. It's just constant practice and persistence and being reliable. Once you get some work, if you set a good example, they'll say, "Oh, this guy's reliable," and they'll keep asking you back. Or you'll be the one they go to when the other artists, fall off to the wayside. I mean, that's how I always got my first jobs. Was because some other artists generally had just suddenly flaked on the publisher, and they needed someone right then. And because I'd been continually sending them samples of my work, and in spite of their rejection letters, they finally say, "Oh, well, this guy's hungry," And so that was how I was able to land work and then steady work after that.
so you do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did either of you ever get anywhere with a cold submission?
No.
I got
nothing but.
Oh, can you explain exactly what the cold?
Oh
space
yeah, this is when you approach someone with your art, saying, "Hey, look at my art. It's neato. Please hire me."
Oh.
And they've never heard of you, and you didn't have an in.
When
you
I
didn't have any in.
Yeah, when I sent samples, then I was summarily rejected. When I showed up at Comic-Con with a portfolio, I got work.
There you go.
I think that's fairly uncommon story. I have the impression that a lot of people go to Comic-Con, and well, now it's like an incredible gauntlet. You can't get your stuff looked at.
I can't get my stuff looked at Comic-Con now. I cannot. They will not look at my stuff. I mean, I went to the children's book publishers a couple of years ago, and not a one of them would look at anything. I mean, I literally am like, I worked on the New York Times bestseller. That was an odd experience. I mean, that was a really odd experience, to have people just say, we don't want to have anything to do with you. And I'm a relatively well-known commodity in that industry. So
Yeah.
Comic-Con is not for artists to go show their work at anymore.
No, It's not, I mean, it's really hard to get to, FaceTime with the people who might be in a position to hire you.
Yeah.
And when they review portfolios, I think they're largely just going through the motions. I think it's a PR thing. And yeah, maybe they're keeping an eye out for the next Mark Bagley, who is,
Sure.
but it's basically a waste of your time and theirs.
I know one guy who got work at Marvel, and he was approached by Marvel.
Wow.
Based on his internet presence, just the stuff he was posting all over the place on different comic websites and so on, and maybe his own.
Who's this?
Ramon Villalobos.
Oh yeah.
He's been busy ever since I met him, and when he had just started his first Marvel book. And it was totally based on, how many hits this guy is getting on his website, and he's on Instagram, he's all over the place. So they're going, hey, and his style happened to be, in line with the kind of new quirky look they were going for. So that's another factor. It's these days that's important that you have an internet presence, at least with the big two publishers. That's the wisdom I've heard. If you're all over the place like that, then you're the one they want, because you've already got a built-in kind of fan base there.
And it's good for your soul. When I get positive strokes on Instagram, I feel better. It's great.
Yeah. So
I had
that's
a question. What is your process when drawing a book? Like, do you have any kind of rituals or
Tradition.
Yeah, traditions? Like, what kind of goes into when you're first getting ready to sit down and start drawing a book?
Are we allowed to talk about animal sacrifice?
Hey, whatever you like.
Go first. Go ahead, John.
Well, look, when I do it right, I'm serious about it, and I do thumbnails. I sketch out each page very small, and then I redo that as a layout, somewhere between usually 8.5 by 11 or 6 by 9, which is print size, somewhere in that range. And I should, if I haven't done somebody else's script for a long time, but when you do that, you read through the script and you look for props and things like that you're going to have to keep track of for continuity. And then later in the job, I like to say that I look at my stuff in the mirror, which is a great way of discovering your drawing errors, because if I'm right-handed, so I think right-handed, I perceive right-handed, and so my stuff has, like from your vantage point, my stuff is prone to have this sort of this slant to it, and you can eliminate that by looking at a mirror, or in Photoshop or Clip Studio, you can click a button and flop it. It's much easier in Clip Studio. I sound like I'm working for them, but honestly, I'm not.
Well, it's just an awesome program. I mean, I just started using it, and it's brilliant. I mean, I wish I had known about it before. It's phenomenal. Go ahead. I mean,
No, I'd said my piece.
Ethan, what's your process?
oh well, now I use this thing called Clip Studio.
Yeah.
And it just so happens that I'm working on in the spring I did I started a series of children's book graphic novels, which is a long comic. It's like 83 pages, and I did the first book traditional, and then I found Clip Studio, and I figured out that it was awesome, and so now I'm doing book 2 digital. So now my process is I do a thumbnail in very, very light orange, and I do that. I basically block everything in and get tell the story with the blocks basically, and after that I go over the top of that and I'll actually draw that out pretty, but it's still a thumbnail. I mean, it's still messy. It's still got lots of stuff that needs prettifying or fixing.
Fine-tuning.
And then after that, I'll actually start penciling it. And now that everything's in the spot where it's supposed to go and is at the right angle, or has some some implied effect, I'll actually go in and draw the effect, draw the character's features, and at that point, then I'll ink it. And sometimes, if I'm familiar enough with the object or the character or what have you, I don't even pencil it anymore. I can ink it right off the rough, where I never had the confidence to do that with actual ink on paper, because you cannot undo. So in terms of speed, there's no thumbnail, switch to another piece of paper, do another one, switch to another piece of paper, or prints, in blue and then refine. It's all done on the same image enlarged or whatever that I've done. So it's like the whole process in terms of like time is like way shorter. And I was worried about inking vitality, but the fact is you can mess up an ink line 10 times and still ink it faster than the ruler that you've got to use on your French curve and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And the line itself, you can get incredible vitality out of it, because you can really just like flip your wrist and flip your arm to get that this sort of power curve on stuff. And it's, I'm amazed at how wonderful it is. And if it wasn't for my eyes going south on me, I probably still wouldn't be using it. But I love it. It's probably gonna, hopefully it'll extend my career if my eyes keep getting worse.
Well, and even if your hands get shaky, with
Yeah,
Clip
you're totally
Studio,
right.
you can set a degree. You can set. You can make the lines you make correct right after you draw them. Like if they're a little shaky, you can, and that's variable. You can.
The taper on the end of the line is variable.
Yeah.
You don't have to learn how to ink thick to thin by applying pressure to a brush or a brush marker or what have you. The program fixes the line for you. So, all the years that I put into trying to ink pretty and ink perfect, can be done in a second by an amateur now if they put their mind to it.
Yeah, if you look at videos of people using Clip Studio, they're just drawing with one finger on the undo button.
Yeah.
And that's Ethan said why, because you're quickly getting a right line, the line what do you think about the value of learning how to? Don't you feel like you're got a leg up by learning how to work traditionally before you go to?
Yeah, when the power goes out, I can light a candle and draw. If the power goes out, you're working in Clip Studio, you're toast, man.
But there's
Or have a
also
generator.
The EMP, right? The EMP that's coming, and all the artists will be like, "Oh, the EMP."
People wave the true talent are left over.
Yeah. Up yours EMP, up yours Facebook, whatever.
I did have a question. What is the weirdest piece of art you've been commissioned for?
Oh, I think I've got the winner.
I was kind of excited about this question because,
It's a great question.
yeah, I think you guys have probably been asked to draw some. I even heard Tide for a second, like a laundry detergent.
Those are pretty run of the mill.
Oh, okay.
The weirdest. Well, there's a guy that comes around a lot of these conventions who wants you to draw something having to do with dick butt. So you put those two together,
Oh,
make a character, right?
yeah.
He's got
Yeah, yeah.
like stacks of these stuff. He's gonna
Yeah.
publish them someday and probably blackmail me, and
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
for the two that I've done already. But that's pretty weird.
That's funny.
But, that's all that
Well
comes to
put.
mind right now.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to see if you guys can top this.
I can't even
was-
top that.
I was commissioned to do a drawing of it was Conan with an old man sitting on his shoulder and messily eating fruit. And I got the feeling
I like
that this was that guy's particular thing. That was a fetish
Yeah.
for him.
Well, I like how you said messily kind of eating it, like he was very, particular
I
about
think,
that.
yeah, I think he was.
Yeah, I have the same thing. The dick butt guy came by. And he asked me to do something. I gave him a pass on that. I just said I'm going to go ahead and pass on on that particular request. That's not
Chris
me.
was right next to you and said, I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. Never mind, I did it.
I'll do almost anything as long as it doesn't combine sex and violence. I'll draw the foulest stuff, basically.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but yeah, he
As
just
long as-
he wants your name signed on it and a picture of you holding it. So
Oh wow. So yeah, you're
it's
like,
like concrete
yeah.
evidence there.
So us as a podcast, we have some questions that we like to ask all the guests. We wanted to know, what's your favorite superhero? Any superhero,
You guys drawn a lot. Is there any
Yeah.
in particular that stand out?
or maybe one you've
Is there a
never.
favorite
Yeah.
superhero of yours?
Mine is Captain America.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that's easy.
Caps
Why?
up.
Oh, I was going to say, why Captain
Yeah,
America?
definitely.
Because he just kind of signifies, a lot of the real heroic aspects, and I just like the acrobatic things that he can do. And as a kid reading those books, it really inspired me. I just thought, oh yeah, I can do that if I trained hard enough, and just with the shield and just the combination of the way his costume is designed, and the way his history
Oh yeah.
came up, coming from the 40s up into the present. For some reason, that just really resonated with me.
Are you liking the movies?
Yeah, I do like them. Yeah,
Yeah.
they've captured it pretty well. I mean, way better than I would have ever dreamed
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
I thought the image of the kid with the Captain America painted on the trash can lid in the first Captain
Oh,
America
yeah.
movie, I literally thought, Kirby would be weeping if he could have seen that. It was,
Oh, yeah.
it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he confronted a bully, didn't he?
And I think it was just
No.
sort of a montage that was happening at the end, towards the
Yeah.
end of the movie, and it just had some people that were like, that liked
Yeah,
Captain
just
America,
like-
and the kids were like playing Captain America, and the one kid, it's like in the 40s or 50s or whatever set.
My guy's Batman, and I think for similar reasons of Chris, that Captain America is just shy of superhuman, and I like that Batman was not a superhero, that he didn't have superpowers. He had just worked really hard on his stuff, and that's sort of inspiring. Because at that age, you feel I could study hard and work out and be that guy.
Yeah.
And have $1 million.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that would help.
that part that might have been a little elusive.
I don't have one favorite. I mean, I really enjoy drawing Samurai Jack. It was one of the, it really kind of like that television show just blew my mind. From a design standpoint, a color styling standpoint, the storytelling standpoint, I loved it. I don't necessarily like drawing Superman, but I love Superman. I like the idea of an all-powerful superhero who doesn't necessarily use his all-powerful superhero powers to do whatever. A lot of what Superman is about is like, why doesn't he rule the world? Well, because he doesn't want to. It's not who he is. I just like that. I like drawing Darkseid and Orion. I like the New God stuff. I like the.
yeah.
I think it's awesome. I actually requested it for one of my. After I finished my first job at DC, I said, we're doing Justice League Unlimited, and if anything ever comes down the pike, I'm interested. But if you're doing something with Darkseid and Orion, and please call me. Please let me be that person. The next job they offered me was a Darkseid Orion Supergirl story. Believe it or not, so I did this big double page spread, and I was just like of the source wall, and I just thought it was beautiful, and I thought it was great, and it was wonderful, and that's mostly the stuff I like to.
I have another one. Is what would your superpower be?
Oh
You
wow,
have any ability.
Any ability.
draw faster.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with the episode of This American Life that deals with this question? They give people a choice.
I don't think of that specific episode now.
They ask people to choose between being invisible and flying.
Oh, okay.
And then they
see.
proceed to profile the psychologies of those two people, and basically conclude that the invisible people are cringing masturbators, and the flying
That is
people
awesome.
are optimists and social. And
Yeah, we had a guest on our show that said he wished he could, his ability would be to slow down time so he could enjoy what was going on more. And I thought that was really cool. It kind of really stuck with me to kind of think about, because sometimes I feel like society, we're such in a rush trying to get to the next thing, and sometimes you kind of forget to sit back and just to give you an idea of somebody else that said something. So we always just like to hear what everybody.
I'd like to be able to see the future.
that'll be
I
good.
mean, that to me would be like, that'd be a real problem solver,
Yeah.
you know?
Know what's
How
coming
to
up.
escape the EMP, you know, how to navigate the stock market, you know?
Yeah.
How to not die in that car crash or save my wife from dying in that car. You know, that would be great.
Chris.
I like the idea of Superman, how he used to just squeeze a thing of coal and make a diamond out of it. That
Oh,
was pretty
yeah.
cool.
Not so bad.
Think
I always
about
thought,
that.
you know,
Make
I
a lot
like
of
maybe
money.
he's right
Yeah.
on. Just,
So
good
that
idea.
was gonna be it. He could be at the cons, being selling
just
diamonds.
be out with his girlfriend going, hey, watch this, you know. There you
You
go.
know, I don't want
Toss
to be a one-upper or brag or anything, but I'm a teacher and I do have the ability to make others feel the time is passing very, very slowly. I would like to
You've already
revisit the
got it.
past. And I'm the opposite of Ethan's.
Yeah. So I got one last
That's it.
question for you guys. This one is by far my favorite, and we always get the most interesting ones with this one. Is if there, with all the zombie shows going on, I'd like to ask, in a zombie apocalypse, what would be your weapon of choice? So just to give you a heads up, mine I found on the internet were 4-arm machetes that latched to my arm so I could slash away.
Hopefully-
Manny's.
Hopefully Amazon's still sending us stuff during it.
Yeah.
So we can order those, right?
Yeah, and then Manny's was a mace. Old school mace. So something we like to ask, we think is fun.
No guns.
No guns. Oh yeah, I
Okay.
forgot to say
Oh.
that.
I was gonna say, are tanks off the?
Yeah.
What about flamethrowers?
I'd
or-
like a
around?
tank.
Oh,
I mean-
hey, actually, I'd be okay with a flamethrower.
Okay, that's mine. I'll go
I
for
like that.
What are you gonna do when the gasoline runs out?
We'll find some
that.
more.
And then you run.
Yeah.
John, you have anything?
I'm not absorbed by zombies.
Oh, no problem.
I need time to read up.
Yeah. Ethan?
Well, and I guess in the absence of a tank, I'd probably go with, a sword or a stick, a big stick. I mean,
Yeah.
sticks are something. If I was really good at using a stick, I mean, that's something you could probably find just about anywhere.
Yeah,
so you'd
that
never
or a
really be
bat.
without a weapon.
Yeah.
A sword might break, but a sword seems like that would work pretty good too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because you could kind of keep them at a distance. You
Be able
know,
to sharpen it all the time,
Right.
so you know.
if you get bit, you could just and end it. You know what I'm saying?
Or whack off your arm.
Yeah.
Remember they
With a
showed
stick.
that?
Yeah, because I wouldn't let him do that. But I'll just put that on the record right now. I'm not gonna be a zombie. Period. It's not gonna happen to me. I will end it before that ever happens.
I like it.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I mean, I'm doing it for Chris.
Yeah. I wanted to
I
open
don't want
it
Chris to
up.
have to deal with that.
Yeah, I wanted to open it up now. Do you guys have any questions for the audience?
Yeah, fire away.
Yeah.
Say something.
Yeah.
Get the ball rolling. For us writers out there like me, do you have any advice for working with artists? Sorry, it's kind of broad and general.
For working with artists,
Working with artists,
well,
or also if you had any particular stories about working with writers, that might be a little more entertaining.
well, the funny thing about working with writers is a lot of times they can write a good story, but then they don't always realize that some of the stuff they're describing can't be visually translated sometimes, or they don't realize that sometimes they're describing something from 2 points of view at the same time. Like you're seeing the guy's face on the back of his head at the same time somehow. There's weird little contradictions in there that you got to watch out for and make sure that it's visually possible to even, show if you're doing a comic book script, say,
I've heard of horror
But-
stories.
Yeah, there's lots of them. So
I guess you gotta keep the perspective.
you just
in
have to,
mind, right?
is this visually even possible?
Yeah, but comic book writers who don't think visually are they're not comic book writers. They're not worth a damn. Because it's they have to be able to visualize a scene and see it in their heads before they can write about it well. I don't have a story, but I've got a story I heard at a comic convention in 1975, and it was Steve Gerber when he was writing Morbius, the Living Vampire, and I think the great Frank Robbins was drawing it at the time. and Robbins called him up and said, "Yeah, this splash page is scripted. You got Morbius standing in shadow on top of a building against a night sky. What's wrong with this picture?" and Gerber, who was telling the story, which is nice and self-effacing, he said he then realized he had called for a black object against a black background that would, just be black with stars scattered here and
You can see his eyes, though.
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Should make your job easier,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
That certainly would.
You send him a black page with two little eyes. There's your drawing, buddy.
Anyone else?
Yes. I guess my question is, when you're starting out, and it's like, it seems like, for all intents and purposes, it can be relatively easy to practice and improve your I guess your basic skills, like your anatomy and your perspective and such. But I feel like, did you guys do anything in particular to practice I guess sort of like comic book page layout and sort of like styling? Because I always feel like there's this, it's like that in itself. It's like there's like an art to it. It's like, especially, I feel like it can be a little bit tough to practice that kind of work, like if you don't write stories yourself. So I guess, do you guys have any thoughts or tips on like practicing like the layout kind of specifically?
In my experience, the good writers that I've worked with have figured some of that out, or if not all of it. So they have, the good writers that have been explained as people who do think in pictures will often, say the panels are arranged thus. The characters, let's say, they'll reference something like, let's do a Eisner type thing here or a Steranko type thing here, etc. For me personally, I don't, particularly when I first start out, I didn't mess around with that stuff because I didn't feel confident doing it. And it's like, it's difficult enough to arrange these objects and pictures in such a way that they can be understood by the reader without putting bells and whistles and disco lights on it. I do like bells and whistles and disco lights, and as I've gotten better, I've pushed that aspect further. But particularly, like you're talking about the fundamentals, I didn't even mess with that stuff because it's like, why would I want to ruin this whole thing by trying to go out that far outside of myself? Another hang-up is that, I've worked with writers that have wanted to explore the boundaries of the comic book medium to the point where they start breaking rules in a way that doesn't make sense, that is not successful, that won't work. And it's at that point, like to think of myself as a functionary. I'm not an editor, I'm not a writer, I'm not in charge of the comic. I do what they tell me and they pay me. So when something comes up, I will usually say, hey, this does make sense to me. Can anybody give me a good reason why this will work? And if they can't and they say draw it that way, then I still draw it that way. But most of the time, when that happens, people will generally say, I didn't think of it that, or, let's try to figure out another way to execute this idea in a way that will make sense and won't, screw up our comic.
I think, I would just, in support of what Ethan's saying, I would say that try not to be afraid of simplicity. We all kind of say, especially when you're young, this has to be the most brilliant page layout that's ever been. I'm going to blow people's mind. And it doesn't work that way. Just think of how many great comic book stories have been told with 6 panels a page. That's as unfancy as you get. That's as plain vanilla as you
That's
get.
all Watchmen is.
We were in 9?
Nine,
I think,
yeah. Sorry, 9. You're
9 Watchmen and classic Ditko Spider-Man.
Yeah.
9 panels a page. So, I'm trying in my late career to get comfortable with simplicity and not overwork stuff. And the one thing I'd say is just make sure that you vary the figure sizes. There's this rule of thumb that says you don't have 2 figures the the same size. You don't have two figures with their heads going the same way at roughly the same size in successive panels. You know, you're just really vigilant about avoiding repetition and monotony. And what happens as a result of that is you get, almost by default, you get good composition. It really, I mean, drawing comics is hard because you basically have to draw everything convincingly, but it's not hard to do a good page layout.
Have you heard of Wally Wood, the artist Wally Wood?
The name sounds familiar.
He's from the 50s and then right up into the 70s. And he did a thing called, you can find all over the internet, called lazy layouts, which, you can find it easily. And he does a lot of different, just ideas for different panels.
Is that the 22 panels?
Yeah. That
always
can
works.
it can keep your pages from looking too static, just by looking at different ways of portraying, an everyday scene, different compositionally or with different lighting or whatever. So
Yeah.
That's pretty handy. But there's always trial and error, that's how it is with me. I'll do thumbnails and thumbnails and thumbnails until it's something I can live with. And, there's no easy rule for that.
Notice what he said, something that I can live with.
Yeah.
I like that. I mean,
gotta get it done.
I totally
job.
identify with that. It's not a masterpiece. It's the best I can do, considering I have to meet a deadline and I have to eat, pay my mortgage, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not Alex Toth. I'm not going to ever be that person. I'm doing the best I can, and I'm trying to get better. But I still have to have to execute ideas within the scope of my talent.
Yeah, that's the thing. When you're doing samples to show to somebody at a show, you can only be as good as you are at that moment, at that day. And so the idea, I remember an Elvis Costello interview, and he was saying that when he was young, he thought you went into a record producer's office with your guitar and said, "Have I got a song for you?" And here it goes. And in comics, we have the same thing. Well, no, I'm not ready to show my samples. And you work and sweat, and because you think that you're going to show them the samples that'll get you the job. No, you're not. You're going to show them the samples that will establish a relationship with that editor that you can capitalize on when you come back next year with better samples. You showing your panels, your work to somebody is just the first step of a process that's basically relationship dependent. Sure.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, our pleasure. One of us.
Yeah.
Do you find that, while working on contracts and things like that, are you able to exercise your individual creativity and be able to have that? Because I like to draw and paint for enjoyment. I had the experience where I designed a t-shirt for somebody and I was ready to kill them by the time I had to change it like 20 times to make it exactly what they want. So do you find enjoyment in your art while you're working on it, or is it so controlled that sometimes it's a little hard?
I experience both, if that makes sense. And I chose comics and children's books because after doing a little bit of advertising type stuff and illustration for sign work, etc., I did some graphic design. Those experiences were more like what you were talking about with your t-shirt, where mostly I just wanted to blow my brains out. And so I knew that wasn't for me. With comics and children's books, those are generally on a deadline, and so there's only so much can be done to any one person's work. So if you're hired and they want changes, you can make those changes, but wholesale changes with a deadline looming are not going to happen. So that to a certain degree, for the most part, you don't necessarily have to worry about that in comics. At least that's my experience. And I've worked with publishers, that are. I guess I've worked with not with DC, but when DC was working with Cartoon Network. So I had two committees of people analyzing my stuff and saying change this, change that. So I mean, I can live with some editing. It makes the work better, generally speaking. But wholesale changes, I'm not into that. I'm not into designing a logo 12 times before somebody.
Yeah. Ethan's does a lot of licensed stuff, and that's how he gets two people looking over his shoulder. You know,
2 committees, by the way. It's not just 2 people. It's like
God.
it's
Well,
12.
that just
It's got to be
sounds
12.
horrible. So a rush job is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a privilege because you're gonna you may come off as a hero, and you don't have to do a bunch of changes. So, and you know, and you have to adopt the "it's done, I like it" aesthetic. You know, because it's a job. There are not many people like Dave Stevens who can be very perfect with every job they produce, or Art Adams is like that too. Most of us don't have that luxury.
Yeah, you can. It depends on who you're working with too. I mean, like just a lot of the regular comics, they give you a fair amount of freedom if they trust you. They know you're talented. You've already established that, and they'll let you go. But if it's something like a licensed character, like what Ethan's doing, or like I know someone that was doing, Woody from Toy Story, some comics for whatever company that was, and he said it's a complete nightmare.
No.
They're constantly just changes,
Yeah.
constantly, no matter how many times they keep sending it back, and it was just heartbreaking. So it depends, but if it's someone where if it's like Spider-Man, where he's got a generic kind of handsome face kind of guy, or Bruce Wayne, you have a lot more leeway if you're happy doing those kind of characters, But within those parameters, you can have a lot of fun and a lot of freedom. Surprisingly, sometimes, as long as it's something that they're delighted with and the fans respond to, that's important.
When I was at Marvel, it's their characters. They're not licensing them from someone else. I felt a huge amount of latitude because I was on a book that was low selling. I was on Quasar. I just changed the haircut because I felt like it, and that was fine. And the whole time I worked at Marvel, that editor only edited me twice. Once because we had blown up the UN building on one page, and he said, "I need this for the X books," so we just blew it up a little. And the other time I had just done a horrible page with Captain America and Fury, something I should have loved doing, and I redrew it. And it was much better afterwards. So, and then the flip side of that is when I was drawing the Power Rangers for a very mellow publisher, but everything was gone over by Saban Entertainment, who owns the Power Rangers. And it wasn't they didn't like how I drew Amy Jo Johnson. And so I got, I had to redraw her some or correct her. And that was mild compared to what, the Woody thing. Well,
That's probably
you know what I'm talking about when I say licensed work? You understand that? Okay. All right.
Great. Thank you guys so much.
Real
We're out of
pleasure.
time.
Thank you all for coming.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks.